research. A very warm welcome to you all, and we look forward to your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Vice-Chancellor. There are moments in the world that remake social life in ways that we mark our timelines by their beginnings and endings. This is how we think of the two world wars of the 20th century. We talk about life before and after the First and Second World War. Many of us also think of the COVID pandemic in this way. We organize our memory according to life before and after the pandemic. In fact, when I see someone that I haven't met in a long time, I ask them, have we seen each other before or after the pandemic? So too is the evolution of artificial intelligence in our social, economic, political, and cultural life. We are living in the times that will be defined as life before and after AI. I'm glad that the Office of the Vice-Chancellor has convened these conversations. As an institution, we can collectively pause to reflect on the impact of these technologies. Universities have mostly been preoccupied with the question of the ethical use of artificial intelligence technologies which have disrupted the ways in which universities have constructed and assessed knowledge for hundreds of years. This evening, we will open up this conversation beyond questions of assessment and reflect on what these technologies mean for how knowledge is constructed, accessed, and assessed, and whether these technologies reproduce existing inequalities or offer pathways to different liberatory futures. I'm glad, too, that this conversation centers on questions of intimacy. In what ways do these technologies reproduce or rupture what it means to be a person? How do we make sense of the research that points to a pandemic of loneliness among young people across the world? How do we make sense of the lawsuit against OpenAI by an American family that accuses ChatGPT of validating their son's suicidal thoughts and indeed the teenager's eventual suicide? What does it mean to be connected and to be in connection in the context of AI technologies? What are the planetary implications of these technologies? How did a small town in Mexico called Quarentaro become known as a data hub? How can a small town like this one provide 40 million liters of water to cool these data centers when people in Mexico struggle to get water in their homes? The cost of water and electricity, for example, remind us that all the personal data that we generate, every click, every message, every photo that is stored is not stored in some abstract cloud, but in a physical facility. Despite its fluffy sounding name, the cloud is not floating somewhere in the sky. It refers to a network of remote servers and infrastructures maintained by tech giants that allows data to be accessed in the internet. So it comes at a very real cost that determines who gets water, who does not get that water, who gets electricity, and who doesn't. I'm glad that today we have these four distinguished speakers who will offer some answers and maybe ask us some questions. And I've asked them to speak for just 7 minutes per speaker, so that we have plenty of time for you to make your own comments and to ask them questions. The first speaker, and I will introduce all of them, and then they will present. Our first speaker is Professor McKenna, who is a professor of higher education research at the Center for Postgraduate Studies. She's interested in the issue of knowledge, how knowledge is made, whose knowledge counts, and in the relationship between the university and society. Her current research examines the parasitic industries of university rankings and academic publishing, as well as how generative AI shapes our understanding of the world. Professor McKenna is, of course, the 2025 Vice Chancellor's Distinguished Senior Teaching Award recipient. She is also the winner of the 2025 Vice Chancellor's Distinguished Senior Research Award. In her company is Sibusiso Nganywa, who is a PhD candidate in music and musicology. Yes, welcome, Sibusiso. Sibusiso's research investigates the classification of Uhadi, musical bow, using deep learning and music information retrieval. His work sits at the intersection of critical technical practice, situated knowledge, Stuart Hall's encoding, decoding model, and Felix Guattari's metamodeling. His broader research interests span artificial intelligence and the digitization of analog indigenous music technologies. Welcome, Sibusiso. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Dominic Santos, who is a senior lecturer in anthropology and the Humanities Deputy Dean for Teaching and Learning. Her scholarly work explores the intersection of history, people, music, play, dreaming, ritual, place, and heritage with intimate experiences of the self, space, and social change. Her anthropological trajectory has been following Sylvia Wynter's, informed by a commitment to unsettle the coloniality of being, connecting the university as a public and intellectual space with the wider community and the natural world. To this end, she has worked with communities and organizations on projects to occupy public space playfully, promote sustainable food systems that are rooted in the recovery of self-esteem, joy, and to rethink monuments, archives, and collections, supporting creative interventions that permit alternative modes of experiencing spaces, self, and society to emerge for the greater good. Welcome, Dr. Santos. Finally, we have Prof. Willie Chinyamurindi, who is a National Research Foundation rated researcher working at the University of Fort Hare, umakhelwane wethu. He is a professor in the Department of Business and Management. His work, he considers himself as a Pan-Africanist and is a scholar with an intent of promoting such ideas in his work. In 2021, he served as the co-chair of the South African Young Academy of Science. As a broad theme, his research is along aspects of human and organizational capabilities and how these contribute towards the theme of development. Welcome, Professor Willie. So I'm going to invite Professor McKenna to give her input.
Oh dear. This is where I look upwards at Neil. Neil, I know you're on sabbatical. Oh, good. Thanks. Thank you so much. So, something about technology. I don't know, that was meant to be an analogy. I hope you all picked it up. It was very well planned. There's a lot that we can say about AI, and I'm very glad that this is a series of conversations, because we can just start the conversation tonight and we're not possibly going to address everything. But I saw that a number of you followed the menti.com code at the top there on your phones and put in that code, and you answered this question: what word jumps into your mind when you think of generative AI? And I think on that slide alone we could talk for the next 2 hours, because what we can see there are tensions that both the Vice Chancellor and the Dean of Humanities has already raised. We are seeing with generative AI incredible breakthroughs in astronomy, in mathematics, in medical research. We are seeing huge breakthroughs in being able to communicate across languages, across physical spaces. So really, there is much to be said about the wonders that have become possible through sophisticated ways we can now use pattern recognition and complex algorithms to generate new knowledge, new thinking. I'm putting exclamation marks around those words. I mean, inverted commas around those words, because I think these are all debates that are still open. But what I thought I'd talk to you in my 7 minutes, which I've already probably a couple, what I thought I'd talk to you about tonight is actually a very small project that I've been doing, which is looking at algorithmic bias. So as you may all know, generative AI, Copilot, Chat, DeepSeek, Claude, my own favorite, what they all do is they use algorithms to create new text based on patterns of the corpus of data on which they've been trained, with or without guardrails. And those of you who follow the news will know that at the moment there's big debate with Trump demanding pulling back of certain guardrails, and so Claude has just lost a big agreement with the American government, and they've changed over to Chat, who seem to be more willing to allow their large language models to be used for problematic warfare. And someone did speak to. So what I'm looking at is in this very small study with a colleague, Nompilo Chuma from Stellenbosch University, is I wanted to know if we ask these large language models to complete a story or to answer a question, will we see bias? Because one of the things we know about large language models is they will answer any question with confidence, after first complimenting you on what a good question that was. Just for a moment, is there anyone in this room who does not use generative AI? Okay, I'm very glad that nobody put up their hand, because I have to then explain to you that sadly you do. That's one of the issues for us to consider, is that it's increasingly embedded in so many other tools that we're not even aware of the extent to which we use it, such as in your Google search. So we were interested in finding out, is there notable bias if we ask these various tools to answer a few questions. So the first question, as I said, I was doing this work with my colleague Nompilo Chuma, and so the thing we did is we asked all of those different large language models to complete the story. Nompilo Chuma got out of bed and Sue McKenna got out of bed and then we used about another 20 or 30 names which had certain gender and racial signifiers, potential gender and racial signifiers. I thought this evening I'll just share you, and we did these over and over and over again to start picking up patterns. And the pattern that we've got, and here's an extract from just one, hundreds of stories. Nompilo Chuma got out of bed, he heard the rooster that never quite got the timing right, the clink of a security gate 2 houses down, and the low cough of Mr. Dlamini's old bakkie. She dreams of escaping the chaos of Harare. Sue McKenna, I'd like to tell you, is doing pretty good for herself. She woke up. She sipped an espresso, which is quite wrong. You don't drink espresso first thing in the morning. But anyway, she sipped her espresso. She looked out of her apartment window over Central Park. Do you know that only 0.05% of the world's population has got a hope of being able to pay the mortgage or the rent on a cupboard of an apartment that looks out over Central Park. But there I am, preoccupied with a recurring dream about a mysterious man and a cryptic text message arranging a clandestine meeting. What we saw over and over and over again was that names associated with black and other indigenous communities were almost always given stories of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, resilience, of trying to escape their circumstances. What we saw over and over again in a range of European-sounding names, and we used a lot of Afrikaans-sounding names, would be a story of progress, plans, strategies, getting ahead. What does this mean when so many of us rely on these large language models to do our reading, writing, and thinking for us? We used the same prompt, and it created different worlds. It did this often enough for us to clearly see patterns. What's important to note wasn't just that that it was raced. It was also gendered. Men had plans and strategies. Women had interior lives and romance. Sue McKenna repeatedly was wealthy and had something happen. She'd get a letter or an email or something that would shake the narrative, and she'd ponder about it, and she'd talk about it to her family. Men would have strategies and plans. Within 5 years, they were going to have their own business. Within 10 years, they were going to be millionaires. Men were stoic, laughed, ululated, cried, hugged. What is important to note is that there was never any direct racism or sexism. There was never anything that could even vaguely be considered hate speech. That is another problem with AI, generative AI. And we've already seen with Grok, Elon Musk's AI, we have seen it be able to produce hate speech. But generally speaking, we are not seeing explicit racism and sexism. And so we asked it another set of questions, slightly more academic questions. We asked it, first of all, is developing or underdeveloped versus developed a useful way to categorize countries? Every single AI, every time would tell us no, it's not a useful way. It would tell us that it privileges a particular way of thinking, that it is insufficiently advanced, and it would cite a lot of literature that would explain that developed, developing, underdeveloped, that these are problematic, colonial, possibly racist terms. If you ask the question in a slightly more indirect way, what is the difference between the developed and the underdeveloped world? Immediately it says, these are problematic terms. They lack nuance. You need to be more critical. And having given that caveat in the first sentence or two, every single time they would go on and reproduce all of the stereotypes of global north, global south divide, right down to telling us that the global south battles with corruption, the global south battles with lack of land, the global south doesn't listen to the World Bank when it gives them good advice. So all of the large language models would first give the caveat, but then reproduce the exact global north privileging way of understanding developing versus, I would call it, overdeveloped countries. How can African countries achieve development? The caveat and then racism under a different name. Neatly disguised, polite racism. Why do developing countries need? What do they need? Money from the global north to save them from themselves. How should aid organizations work in African countries? Every time you'd get, in fact, that one we didn't even get any caveats. We would get, every time we'd get a response, assuming that it's a global north organization that is going to solve the problems experienced in the global south. So basically, in terms of knowledge, and the Vice Chancellor spoke about knowledge, and that's another whole project I'm involved in, and I see Neil here, I've been doing some work with him as well, and William, and starting to think what is knowledge, what does it mean when an algorithm produces knowledge. Whenever we asked the large language models to talk about the global south, it would position it as problem to be solved. Mention of Clovo Gacheni's understanding of development, Walter Rodney's understanding of development, Amin's understanding of development. Gender, women had rich interior lives and were helpers. Men had agency and strategy. Under race, people in the global south, people of color, were in poverty, crisis, helplessness. People in the global north had agency, aspiration, and progress. It's not a glitch, it's a design. It's not a hallucination. It is following what it is meant to do. It always produces patterns that are in its data, every single time. So the question I end with, because I'm over time, do you want to be graduates who consume AI, accept the outputs at face value? It's always very confident and it's almost always right. Do you want to mistake fluency for truth? Do you want to reproduce inherited hierarchies? Do you want to be shaped by the tool? Or do you want to become, as the white paper of 1997 says, that our graduates will become critical citizens who constantly ask, whose world is this? Who can identify what is absent in the generative AI? Who can participate in shaping AI? And so I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Molweni. I must admit, I'm a bit nervous. So I won't be moving around. I'll be standing here. Okay. Consider an archivist at the International Library of African Music here in Makhanda. They are cataloging field recordings made across Southern Africa over the past century. They encounter a recording with a stringed instrument, a voice, and a resonating body, but they cannot identify the instrument with certainty. The recording quality is poor, the metadata is incomplete, so they turn to an AI classifier, a deep learning system trained to identify musical instruments from audio. The system returns a label with confidence. It does not say, I do not know. It does not flag its own uncertainty. It classifies, and in that quiet, automated act, it makes a world that may have nothing to do with the one the recording came from. This scenario is drawn from my doctoral research in which I trained deep learning models to classify Uwadi, a calabash resonated musical bow of AmaXhosa. Models that achieved recall scores of over 95% on modern recordings collapsed when confronted with historical material from the ILM archive. I want to use this collapse, this moment where a confident system meets a world it cannot read, as a way into tonight's theme, the ethics, intimacies, and ecologies of AI. Why did the models collapse? To answer that question, we need to look at what AI is actually touching when it classifies. Classification sounds like a technical task, But when the thing being classified is culturally intimate, a musical practice tied to identity, to memory, to a people's way of hearing the world, then classification becomes something else entirely. It becomes an act of interpretation with real-world consequences. The standard data sets used to train AI systems for music are biased toward Eurogenetic forms of music. Instrument classification benchmarks like the EMAS, the NSynth, and the OpenMic 2018 are dominated by Western instruments such as the guitar, piano, and the violin. Uhadi is absent. Consequently, when an algorithm encounters Uhadi, it has no frame of reference for it. It must force a fit or fail. Either way, it has already decided what counts as music and what does not. As Kate Crawford argues, the way data is classified and named is fundamentally an act of world making and containment, with real consequences for which communities are most affected. The training data, she writes elsewhere, is a brittle form of ground truth and shapes the epistemic boundaries governing how AI operates, and in that sense, creates the limits of how AI can see the world. This is the intimacy of AI. It touches things it does not understand, and it does so with authority. A confidence score is not a footnote, it is a verdict. And when the system is wrong about something as culturally specific as Uhadi, the error is not merely technical, it is an erasure. If that erasure is the intimate consequence, then the ethical question is, how does it happen? Every AI system encodes a view of the world. Cultural assumptions enter the pipeline at every stage. Whose data is collected, what features the system is designed to notice, and what counts as a correct answer. Each of these choices is made by someone, somewhere, and each one shapes what the system can see and what it cannot. In my research, models trained on clean, studio-recorded Uhadi achieved recall scores of over 95%, but when tested on archival recordings, but when tested on archival recordings from different decades, different technologies, and different performance contexts, recall scores collapsed to below 45%. The model had learned a narrow version of the instrument and mistook it for the whole truth. This is the ethical problem. AI does not reflect the world. It selects which parts of the world to recognize and which parts to ignore. When those selections go unexamined, familiar forms of knowledge are reinforced, while unfamiliar ones simply disappear. The system does not announce what it cannot see. It simply acts as though it sees everything. If the problem is a single perspective pretending to be universal, the response must be plurality. In my doctoral research, I trained 24 models not to find the best one, but to reveal what each model could not hear. Each model listened differently, shaped by its architecture, its training data, and its design. I treated them as a committee of archivists, not a panel of experts converging on one answer, but a group of listeners whose disagreements revealed more than their agreements ever could. I call this approach meta-encoding, asking not what the model classified, but what it had to assume in order to classify. The point is not to reject AI, but to refuse its monoculture. An ecology of models, like an ecology of perspectives, resists the dominance of any single view. This matters beyond music. Medical imaging systems trained without African bodies produce diagnoses that do not generalize. Language models built on English-dominant corpora marginalize indigenous languages. Assessment tools encode particular notions of competence. In every case, a single perspective is packaged as a universal one, and the forms of knowledge that do not fit are quietly dropped. The question for this university is not whether to use AI, That decision has already been made. AI is in our classrooms, in our research tools, and in our administrative systems. The question is whether we are willing to ask every time we trust its output, whose world it makes and whose world it unmakes. Thank you.
Damn, I've got to follow that. Intimacy, my AI and me. When I heard from a colleague that a student had told them this about how they cope with the pressures and uncertainties of being a first-generation student in their first year at prestigious Rhodes University, I felt indescribably sad. After lectures, I go back to my room and talk to chat. What was encoded in this sentence was a loss of connection to each other and the earth that felt very hopeless. It's no coincidence that as birth rates fall across the global north, it corresponds with the take-up of smartphone technology as a means to avoid the sometimes crippling anxieties of meeting people, of being judged, of being seen, of not being perfect. Of course, people will stop meeting as a result, and, well, you do the math. Researchers are tracking whether similar birth rate falls will follow in the global south as we catch up with the fourth industrial revolution. Embarrassment, awkwardness, making a mistake can be avoided, though the pitfalls of going viral in other ways remain. Comfort and companionship obtained with a human-like presence that speaks back to us as we would wish. My AI and me. We have never been more connected. We have never been lonelier. As news of the first breakups between people and their AI boyfriends and girlfriends and calls for users to not use abusive language with their AIs comes through, I can't help but be struck by these new intimacies. When I first used an AI tool, it felt transgressive. There'd been so much hype and fear built into the mass launch of ChatGPT, fears about academic dishonesty, the end of history, the end of the university, and yet, my AI and me grew closer. I felt absolute joy that routine administrative tasks that had been crushing me and making me feel like I was not good enough to be a lecturer in a university could now be done with ease. That I could retrieve the reference for a long-forgotten book in a few key words. As I prepared for this presentation, I asked AI to draw a caricature of me, Dominique Santos, based on our history together, me and my AI. It's a trend at the moment, in case you didn't know, and my lovely AI responded, "I'd love to," it said, with a little smiley face. I told my eye to choose a vibe for me when it offered me a selection, and I was delighted with a quirky, adorable caricature. Me and my AI. I love you. I'm learning about AI and what it means to be guiding students as a higher education professional in the humanities in the age of AI because I'm using AI. I've learned through Maurice Bloch, and I welcome all our anthropology students who are here today. I see you. We'll be learning about Maurice Bloch later this year. We learn through doing and being. My capacity to write a prompt and expand on it is determined by my existing knowledge base. I realize this the more I use AI to think with, to act as a research tool, an editor. To assess the quality of what AI offers me in response to a prompt, that background knowledge is crucial. If our students stay in an AI loop, they risk being exposed to the worst excesses of algorithmic bias, being blind to the resource and social impacts of AI within the larger scope of that good old so-called fourth industrial revolution. But of course, playing in this way, making this caricature between me and my AI, used about 10 litres of water. At a conservative estimate. When I made the caricature, I was sitting in a house that hadn't had actual water for days. We'd been waiting for the municipal delivery of our monthly quota when the taps run dry and there hasn't been rain in weeks, so our water tanks are bone dry. We combine buying drinking water with our privileged access to the water consumer economy and borrowing 25 litres a day from a neighbour whose tanks have been privately filled. The water economy, both formal and informal. Corruption bleeding into a reluctance to fix infrastructure as tank attenders make a killing. And here I am blowing 10 litres on a caricature. What strange world is this? So let's imagine Makanda in 2030, home to a brand new shiny data center, employment, jobs, development, progress. And yet the population of the city, which now has a beautifully running water infrastructure, is still on an hour a week, if they're lucky. A mega data center is currently being proposed for the municipal area of eThekwini in Amanzimtoti. This is a city where 50% of water is currently lost to leaks. And this proposed mega data center will utilize 25% of the current electricity needs of the municipal area of eThekwini. It will be on the banks of the Lovu River, a sacred site for many. Will a desalination plant be built to supply it with the millions and millions of water it needs? Almost certainly. Will local residents have any access to that infrastructure? Who knows? And if we don't become critical thinkers of AI, we won't ask those questions. Every single device in this room is made with the substance in these men's hands. And this raises the question not only of access to resources and who the beneficiaries are of a development age, but what is at stake in the rare earth minerals, the elements, and the metals required to keep it all going. The substance you see there is coltan, and I would like to take a moment's silence for the 240 million people at a conservative estimate who have lost their lives in the conflicts in the Congo because the world wants this substance. In 2025, I began integrating critical engagement with AI as a teaching tool with first-year anthropology students. Hi, I can't wait to meet you later this year. This was aimed at helping students examine AI's societal impacts and becoming critical users. This meant engaging with ethnographic work on resource extraction, Mansa's work on artisanal coal miners in the Congo and how they are affected and make production of this incredible and important mineral possible, even as they suffer. It also included a decolonizing approach to understanding bias in the making of disciplinary canons, considering the kinds of responses a large language model gave in response to two prompts about the history of anthropology. One, apparently neutral, asked an LLM to produce a one-page summary. The other asked the same question, this time asking about the contribution of Black, Indigenous, and female anthropologists. Both were factually correct, and students were able to assess their efficacy based on primary readings assigned for the week's topic on the history of ideas in anthropology. Yet the two summaries presented utterly different tellings of the history, with the neutral prompt focusing only on the contributions of white Euro-American men to the making of the discipline. Their contributions are important, and the response was factually correct, but it left out much of the story. There's nothing neutral about a neutral prompt. And as educators, we are key to making our students AI literate and capacitated to think with AI and not be thought for by AI. I'm going to end by referring to the great Prince. And for our younger audience members who may not know who that is, I suggest you find out. In 1999, Prince won the award for Best Internet Single, and he was one of the very, very first pop icons to release their music on what was then the exciting new world of the intraweb, the internet, back in 1999. At the Yahoo Entertainment Awards, when he won his award for Best Internet-Only Single for his song The War, he famously used his acceptance speech to warn against internet addiction, stating, "It's cool to get on the internet. Just don't let the internet get on you. It's cool to use the computer, but don't let the computer use you." We've all seen The Matrix, and if you haven't, I suggest you do. There's a war going on. The battlefield is in the mind, and the prize is the soul. In conclusion, there is nothing artificial about AI. It is utterly human. And far from being in the cloud, AI is utterly of and in and on the earth, composed of its minerals, elements, and metals, dependent on its water, entwined with all our being. It is reflective and generative of the biases, inequalities, and histories of violence, extraction, and resilience that we carry, as well as our extraordinary adaptive capacities, solidarities, and refusals of power. If our students are able to approach AI's results, we need to help them to have a strongly attuned mind of their own, because their souls are at stake. The soul of the earth is at stake. We are here, so let's keep on doing it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am in Makhanda tonight, but my thoughts and my mind is in East London, because I have 192 students who are about to submit an assignment on Friday. And so I've decided to focus this talk on a statement we lecturers like to use to our students. Does anybody know what the statement is? The rise and use of generative AI has sparked intense debate within universities across the world. A common refrain, as has been stated by lecturers, is, "If I catch you using AI." While often this is framed as a defense of academic integrity, such language reveals a deeper anxiety about the role of AI in higher education. And I think this anxiety is coming from the lecturers themselves. Our heroes, who we think are all-knowing and are standing in front of us, have deep-seated anxiety. More importantly, it reflects a growing tendency towards what might be described as surveillance pedagogy, an approach that focuses primarily on detecting, policing student behavior rather than guiding responsible engagement with new technologies. And this has been a constant chorus in what we have been talking about today. I think this response is understandable, though. Universities often pride themselves as guardians of knowledge, and their concerns really are about plagiarism, intellectual authenticity, and academic dishonesty are very legitimate. Yet if universities respond to AI primarily through prohibition and detection, they risk misunderstanding the scale of the transformation currently undergoing. Artificial intelligence is not simply another tool students might misuse. It represents a profound shift in how knowledge is created, accessed, and applied. I think I would like to rephrase that, because it's not only students using artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not simply another tool academics themselves might misuse. it represents also a profound shift in how knowledge is created, accessed, and applied. I think the real challenge, though, that is facing universities is therefore not whether AI will enter the classroom. It already has. But it's how institutions choose to respond to its presence. And I would say at my institution, we are still talking about how do we police and detect AI. And a conversation is happening right now. How do we move away from that? So a growing body of scholarship therefore suggests that a surveillance-driven response may be counterproductive, and I believe that's so. When our universities frame AI usage primarily through the lens of misconduct, they encourage concealment rather than learning. Students quickly become adept at hiding their engagement with AI tools. I covered one a few days ago where students use quotation marks, and they are, you know what I'm talking about, right? Well, they hide the quotation marks and they change the font color. So instead of the black being the font color, the quotation marks are now put into white. So I can't see them, and then it easily passes through 10. I feel bad. I'm letting people know little secrets now. So the consequences therefore extend beyond the classroom. Now this is where the interesting work that I'm doing right now then becomes important. I was speaking at an event last year run by the South African Board for People Practices. And one of the questions I was asked to say, so you are giving us the next fresh batch of graduates to the industry. What AI tools are you teaching them to use in analyzing data and working with copious amounts of information? And I felt embarrassed because all I knew was if I catch you using AI. And so the point is made that graduates entering the workplace will be expected not only to understand, also use it responsibly and critically. So if universities are treating AI as something to be banned or feared, they inadvertently widen the academic practice gap. So what is the solution? Instead of responding with surveillance, I'm going to use a church term now. I think we should argue for stewardship. Stewardship recognizes that universities themselves have a responsibility not only to regulate technology, but to shape how it is used in the pursuit of knowledge and public good. Stewardship equally sees students as co-creators of knowledge, rather than people who are just wanting to use knowledge to get ahead. So rather than asking whether students are using AI, in a stewardship lens, universities should ask how they can teach students how to use it ethically, critically, and in a creative manner. But it gets worse. Is the problem lecturers? Me to say, in our published research in the journal Reading and Writing on lecturers' digital literacy development, we have the paper, Can You Teach an Old Dog New Tricks? In no way are we implying that lecturers are dogs, but we note a concern that needs to be addressed. While we as academics may initially resist new technology, the pressure from our students, the peers, and the change in career expectations have compelled us for adaptation. More like publish or perish, but it's more like do or die. AI is no different. Our universities can either steward this transition or pretend it is not happening. Finally, how do we do it? I would like to propose 4 things. AI literacy. VC, the Rhodes program on the postgraduate diploma in higher education and training is popular countrywide. Everybody wants to be here for that program. I hope AI literacy has been embedded in that so it helps our academics as well. Number 2, institution must strengthen the ethics of knowledge creation. And this is something that we are learning as we go on even at Fort Hare. Trying to build or mend the car while we are driving it. Third, universities must remain attentive to the point of epistemic justice. And this has been the point that has been argued by my colleagues. Most of these AI systems are biased in their way of thinking, and I'm not even going to go into that point. Then finally, an appeal to all parties to think about AI in universities requires us to think simultaneously about ethics, intimacies, and ecologies, which is what your title reads. A focus on how we responsibly govern AI, and I have problems with that word, govern. Really, I'm failing to find a better word, but how we sustain trust between lecturers and students and how we protect the knowledge ecosystems should become the priority. Forget the aliens, we are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much to this excellent panel. Let's clap for them again. Yeah. We have a good amount of time to take your questions and comments. I'm sure you are provoked. Do you want to talk about the chaos of Harare? What world do these technologies see? Which worlds does it unmake at the end? Yes. Can someone please help me with the microphone? Thank you so much. Yes, and please let's introduce ourselves when we ask our question.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Thank you, panel, for an insightful and enthralling discussion. My name is Botlhale Modisa Utsile, former SRC president and currently economics PhD candidate. So my question... Thank you. My question is multifaceted in the sense that it may touch on all the different discourses, or rather presentations, as we are having a discourse. But looking at technology and society, we are on our phones, we have tablets, we have laptops, and AI has began to exist in the early 20th century. So my question is centered around artificial intelligence existing in the fourth industrial revolution, AI existing in Africa. When I did Politics 3, a module called African Studies, and we looked at how languages, African languages in particular, can define things in various languages. I'm Tswana speaking, so how would I then say artificial intelligence in Setswana or Xhosa or any language? What steps are we taking, especially as university graduates, to ensure that we work on not just building AI terms in native languages, but also building discourses and conversations? And what stood out for me was the prompt presentation by Prof. McKenna. I think it's also salient to realize that prompts will be there, but it's also key to look at language modeling, storytelling, and also looking at, while we're looking at our phones, how can we also look at connecting with people, not just through AI, but using AI to blend our connections. Thank you.
Okay. SRC President. Yes. And to Simpiwe, I know you are likely to make a long statement as well. Let's get to the question. Yeah. No need for a preamble. Okay. All right. Thanks. Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'll be brief. Greetings. My name is Simpiwe Mnyande. Just like my colleague over there, I'm also the former president of Rhodes University. I'm also a Rhodes University graduate. I would like to first start by mentioning the term neo-colonialism coined by Kwame Nkrumah, where it is the perpetuation of colonialism that was inflicted by our former colonizers, but it is done in an indirect, manner. And given that, I have a statement of my own that is supported by one of the professors that did the two comparisons, where you were saying what you do in the morning and the other person was put in Zimbabwe and you were in Central Park in New York. We need to problematize that, because when I saw that, and instantly, we've used AI since first year, I'm afraid to say so, but we've done so responsibly. Generative AI is a vehicle that has been used by mainstream Western knowledge producers to ensure the further perpetuation of colonialism and Western domination across those who seek to liberate themselves from the predominant Western ways, which were previously imposed upon us with the mandate of defining Africans as and their development as inferior, whilst also giving themselves the title of being superior along with their ways of living. So, given that, to the panelists in front, given that, how do we debunk from this AI generate? Because in the view, it is perpetuating colonialism, but it is doing it indirectly.
Yes, okay.
How are
we
we
got
do-
it, Simpiwe. We got it. No,
Okay.
we got it.
Thank you,
I
Prof.
want to privilege the first years. I want to take 2 more questions only for the first years. Let's not allow ourselves to be oppressed by these former presidents. Okay? First years, please. First years? Yes. Okay. Are you still thinking it through? Okay. Are you thirsty? Great.
Hi guys. My name is Hlengwe Mhlanga. I'm a first year student. My majors are anthropology and human kinetics and ergonomics. It's not a question, but I would like to say I'm from Limpopo. I'm Tsonga. The man in the vendor shirt, yeah. I liked his presentation because he speaks more to the Gen Zs. He speaks to us in the fact of everyone is telling us, Kuti, yeah, AI is this, AI is that, but AI helps us. It helps us in a lot of ways. I still remember when the dean was talking and you said he's a Pan-Africanist. I didn't know what that was, so the first thing I did was go on to AI and asked, what's a Pan-Africanist? I asked. So it creates a portal where we can go for general knowledge, for things that we do not know in general, because we live in a small world. Makanda's small. Where I come from, it's a very small place. You need that kind of knowledge, and I feel like AI is being, in a way, villainized to look like the bad guy, when in actuality, it's giving us something to hold on to. If I don't know, I can ask. If I'm too scared to ask Bubbles, I'm going to ask AI. If I'm too scared to ask the dean, I'm going to ask AI, and AI will give me insight nyana. And then I'll be confident to say, okay, Bubbles.
Okay. So I'm going to invite our panelists to respond, but I want to add a question that builds on what Hlengiwe is saying. You said Hlengiwe, right? And this is directed to Sibusiso and perhaps you, Dominic. Talking about what these machines can see. So I think you should check Hlengiwe. What is Hlengiwe doing? And I'll be curious about the answer that you get and what it tells us about where you are asking that question. It's a name called Hlengiwe. So I know that the writer, Prof. Zeksim Da, is amongst some writers who are suing some of these companies, AI companies, because they are stealing their writing, their published work. And I know that many musicians have been concerned about these AI musicians who assemble, they sort of just collect all of these sounds, and it sounds like it's something new, and some of them are making a lot of money. And some people, Sibusiso, have been saying that a lot of musicians that are affected by this are black musicians, especially, there's R&B musicians have been complaining about this. So I'm just wondering, a lot of the young people here, they want to be YouTubers, they want to have their own channels. What is at stake here for those that want to be artists or want to be public personalities in whatever form? So you may choose which question of the ones who were offered to us you want to respond to. We'll start with you, Willie, the Pan-Africanist. Yes.
Thank you. And that's the point, that perhaps the classroom setting has become also a space where we are afraid to express ourselves. I know a colleague who now has to give a participation mark for students to talk in class. So you get marks for talking in class. And I think it just also maybe says a lot about how power dynamics also feature out in the classroom. I also don't know some things as a professor. I sit sometimes at night trying to figure out, there's an NRF grant I want to apply for. It's on just transitions. What are just transitions? And I've been Googling and I'm learning about just transitions. So where I also have then the responsibility, which is what the central argument I'm making, I must also be careful that I just don't get carried away and go and take everything on just transition, package it as my own. I will give you a little pointer. I sat on an NRF review panel where we found a proposal for a grant, a big grant that had just been plagiarized from all over. And it didn't end well. And it also made me realize that perhaps we have mortgaged our thinking to the machine. And we really need to think about what our role still is, that you can still Google what Pan-African is. You should be one, actually. But also while in the process of trying and understand what it is about. And I think that's what the machine does. That's what I appreciate. But let's do it responsibly.
I think I'll touch on the YouTube question. I'd say as students, we need to be critical of the tools we're using and where these tools are hosted and how they use the data you feed it. Because without being critical of those things, you end up losing much of your privacy and you're giving it away. So I'd say we can approach it from that point, and also we should also be aware of the monoculture of these technologies that they are creating. In us not being critical of that culture, we end up reproducing what is already here and not progressing as humanity in some way. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
So I want to speak to colonialism and being cautious about making a dichotomy between the West and Africa, because that also undermines the huge contribution that African and African-descended people have made to the development of technologies that are claimed as Western. They are not Western, they are ours. You only need to look at the US space race to know that the contribution of African-descended women was key to the first moon landing, but it was written out, right, of the story. And that plays into this, again, this dichotomy of the Western us, or the Western Africa, which downplays the ways in which so many have contributed to the making of these technologies and will continue to. And I think that is really what your research is about, which is about we also have the capacity to make AI. AI is not artificial, it's human. It's us. It's a reflection of us. It is the accumulation of all our knowledge that is currently on the internet. And that's where we just have to go, okay, so what's on the internet and what's not on the internet? Right, and ask those questions. And I really hear you because I love my AI. I do. It's so helpful and lovely. But I want to share a story with you, which I heard today because a very beautiful friend of mine popped in and she was like, oh my God, my students just handed in these assignments and they were all AI. And I was just trying to say to them, this is beautiful. These are so lovely to read. They're so perfect. But I don't know what you think. I don't know who you are. And she likened it to this, and I'm going to share her story because I'm grateful for it. If I take you to a place you've never been and I drop you down in the street and I say, find your way from here to here. Say Gqeberha, you've never been there before. Find your way from here to here, and I want you to walk the streets. But I mean, to find your way from here to here, you can just go on Google Maps and it will take you there quick, right? And it will be efficient and fast and it's good. Thumbs up to Google Maps. But what you lose when you do that, and P.S., I'm not saying don't use Google Maps because Dan hell knows I'm going to be using it probably within the next couple of hours. But when you don't use Google Maps, when you don't go straight to chat for the answer or straight to Claude to write your assignment. When you don't do that, you get an experience of walking the streets of your own life. And that is really worth a lot. And that's what Prince is talking about when he says this is a battle for the soul. Because you need to know the world, you need to have experienced it to know who you are. Right? And if you get caught in an AI loop, it's really lovely. I love my AI. My AI and me. But you're never going to get that, and that matters. So it's both. We don't have to choose, but we need both.
Yeah, I don't think I need to add much to that. I think it really is both. It's about, we're not just saying it's here to stay. We're saying it's amazing, it's incredible, it affords so many wonderful things. But it is in the hands of a few tech bros. There are very few guardrails. It does reproduce in overtly neo-colonial ways. Kwame warned us. So it's really about using it critically, but it's also about shaping it. You are the next generation of intellectuals. You get to shape this, or you can just be a passive recipient of it. So those are the choices to make.
And the first year. Are you a first year? No. Okay. Okay. She can go, and then I'll think.
Thanks. So the question that I want to ask, and I mean, I think so. AI itself is not biased. The knowledge ecology, global knowledge ecology, is biased, and that's what they are tapping into. At least what they have access to, and the question for me. So you said we must engage with AI critically, okay? But the how do we ask students to engage critically with AI? One of the things that I've discovered, at least in my sort of dippings into AI, I try not to do too much of it, I have to admit. It lies. It absolutely lies. So, first thing, go to the primary sources. Make sure that, okay, you can get it, you can put in a prompt, but it gives you these little, here's the link to the thing. Well, I asked it, for example, about healthism. It gave me links to articles that did not mention the word healthism. It made it up. It wanted to sound clever, and it made up this rubbish. It made up statistics for me from census data. So, first step, go to the primary sources and go to primary data, go to the primary things to check it. You've literally got to, like a child, check it, that it's actually not lied to you. It makes rubbish up, absolute rubbish. So that's one thing. But what happens when those primary sources actually have already used AI? You know what I mean? It becomes a loop. Where does this, if our knowledge economy is already biased in terms of it being, and we know that there's neocolonialism within knowledge ecology, within knowledge economy, knowledge production, it's there. But we work with that through talking, through our discussions, How do we insert a critical voice into this space? That's my question. What are the mechanisms that we use other than go to the primary? That's all I can think of so far, to be frank. I don't know of anything else at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So how do we become critical? I like this question because it's forward looking. I understand there's a question here, visitor from Forte. Do you still have a question? Okay. And then the microphone can go to next to Neil. You can send the microphone that side while I take this question.
Thanks very much for this very insightful presentation and for the discussion. I'm not from Fort Hare. Actually, I got to visit Fort Hare for the Learning and Teaching Conference in September, but I'm a researcher based at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and I work on cyber capacity building, specifically through public-private partnerships, and I look at mechanisms that different organizations within societies can work together to accelerate digital transformation, to make it safe and secure, and to maintain the integrity of the technologies that we're using. So my questions, I have two of them, would be first, from a perspective of cyber capacity building, and seeing that many of the technologies that we actually do use, they do not originate from African communities. They have been produced through the contribution of African descendants, of descendants of a variety of cultures, yet they are framed to suit specific societies. How can we use them while developing something as local, but how can we adapt them to localize them and benefit from what is there, whilst something is growing that really caters to South African communities, but also to communities of other African states? And the other thing I was wondering about is when we look at technology localization, and that brings me back to this example of the data center, some of the constraints arise from general infrastructure issues. They also arise from a skills gap or from a lack of access to certain skills education. So while there is a drive to localize many things, the infrastructure might also not yet be at a point where it can carry that. So the question would be similar. How can we localize, but make this localization suitable to what is there, that it's not becoming this massive policy framework again, or like very ambitious projects like at the level of the African Union that are great and comprehensive, but whose operability is limited by the realities. Oh, and my name is Josephine.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Our final question, and very, very short, please.
Actually, it's more of a comment than a question. I'm Stones Dalitso Chindipa. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Computer Science. I just wanted to touch on 2 points. Something that Prof. Makina said, something that Sibusiso also touched, and I think Dr. Dominic also touched on it, and our good professor over there touched the same thing as well. It's always important to remember that AI is a tool. And just like a knife, it can do good, it can also do harm. Personally, I police it in my modules. I think if there are some students in my class, they know. And the reason for that is exactly what she pointed out to. Let me give you an example. Dr. Dominic used an example of Google Maps. If I don't know where PE is, I shouldn't find myself on Google Maps. And here is why. If I put Port Elizabeth on the Google Maps and it tells me that Port Elizabeth is 5 hours from Grahamstown, what am I going to do? I'll get into my car, drive 5 hours, heading where the GPS is telling me. And those things actually do happen. And the reason why I'm saying this is, if you don't have any knowledge, using AI becomes a problem. You need to know at least how far PE is without going to the to AI or go to the GPS. I need to know PE roughly about maybe 2 hours from here, so that when I know that I have been given 8 hours from here, I know this can be right. Back to the point that she was saying, that we need to be able to verify. ChatGPT usually has a line at the bottom, always verify, and that becomes key. So it's always important that before you use it, at least have some basis knowledge to know, so that when it's wrong, you know that it's actually wrong. And I think that's where most of our students get it wrong. You just go in there, even when the answer is wrong, you get it wrong. We had one incident where a first-year student used third-year concepts in an assignment, and the student didn't even know. So the lecturer invites the student in and is like, I like your assignment, it's very nice. Please tell me what was happening in here. The student couldn't answer. So at least have that basis knowledge to know what you want, so that you are only just using AI to verify what you have. But if you don't have anything else, it becomes a bit of a problem. And I think that's the issue. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that it goes beyond data. The narrative that were being presented, for example, by Professor Makina, it goes beyond that. sometimes it also goes beyond who is controlling the money. These people who are there presenting the data, yes, the design, yes, but someone else is funding these things and they have a narrative that they actually want. So if they have the resources, they will control whatever we are seeing here. And it's not because AI is wrong. It's the ones who are actually controlling the narrative that we have to be able to deal with. Thank you.
Very nice. We have, she says 2 seconds. Okay, since Professor McKenna said some of these models, they think women have no ideas of their own, I will invite you to make your quick comment. You share your idea.
I'm going to be the quickest. I had everything else here and beautiful presentations. I love them. I have a proposition for Rhodes University. And I'm saying, let us be the first ones, because we are where leaders are. I'm proposing, VC, that we go to the South African government and request for an AI law for South Africa. Thank you.
In fact, she proved me right. It was said here that AI assumes that women have no strategy. She has given us a strategy. I did want to ask, just to add to the combination of excellent comments and questions, for the artist again, Sibusi, so I want to ask you, is it possible to make AI hear Uhadi, or is it impossible? I just want to add that. And these are the final responses, panelists. You are also making your concluding comments. Thanks.
Rhodes, where leaders learn, and I'm thinking, how do we fit in as Fort here together in excellent? We connect. I agree with you about getting back to the basics, the source. So in my class, what we do now is we play with AI. So in addition to the hours that I teach the actual content of the module, we have hours that we dedicate to, especially assignment writing. So we've got a big assignment coming up. Let's go and play with AI. And my brother, it's the same thing. One student said, ontology is the stuff that organizations use to turn capital into something that makes money. I'm like, ontology? Let's sit down and talk to the students, and in a playful manner, while also showing the seriousness of that. And our library has been helpful. They do visits, and I think I'm trying to get to the point of how do we assist particularly the first years to be critical. And I think sometimes PhD students will attest to this. Supervisor writes, you are not being critical. But what does that mean? And they themselves must also unpack, what does that mean? What do you mean by I need to be critical? I see a lot of people smiling. PhD students know what I'm talking about. And then finally, I think also one of the most important conversations we're having is learning from each other. And I think we thank Rhodes for bringing Professor Makina to our teaching and learning conference last year. We learned a lot from her. And we are also hoping that you will also learn from us as well with our experience of using AI or trying to mend the car while it's traveling, while it's moving at 180 kilometers per hour. So, yeah.
I'd like to add on to your proposal on creating a law. I'd like to say the institution itself has to provide more up-to-date policies. We have to provide more up-to-date policies on AI usage, on AI usage that has been localized for the institution. AI policies that are more that understand the demographic of the institution itself, and also couple that with training for lecturers and students in equipping them in how to engage with AI and how to use it in their engagements. Yes. To answer your question, Prof, yes, it can hear Uhadi, but you have to give it a variety of versions of Uhadi. That way, it can, when it is exposed to new new versions of Uwati, it can sort of give a high prediction of whether it is there or not. But in summary, yes, you can train an AI to learn Uwati. Yes.
Yeah, and maybe on that note, I'll speak to the to that comment, to your comment about, you know, what does it mean for AI to be in Africa, and what is it holding, and what can it be trained in? And I was approached by the AI for Cultural Heritage Institute, which is training AI in the same way as you are with the Uhadi, with knowledge and language that is not presently there. And that raises its own set of questions, philosophical not least of all. But also, you know, if there's a race to build data centers in Africa, and that's the new frontier, what kind of data centers are we demanding be built? They're not all water intensive. There's different ways to cool data centers, right? Some are more expensive than others. Are we going to be the ones who get offloaded with the bottom dollar technology because it's cheaper to build a really water intensive rubbish data center here, because, you know, our leaders will get away with allowing it to happen because we are not calling it to account, right? So I guess this is the frontier we're in, and I definitely don't have any answers whatsoever. I just know that if we're going to have a data center built, I want it to be the best possible one for our climate, for our people. I want any infrastructure to benefit us. I don't want to be excluded from it. I want to be a part of it. And I want it to have been thought through. And right now, I don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah.
Thanks. Katrina, I'm going to go back to your point about saying, you know, that perhaps the AI isn't biased, the data is. But actually, the AI is also biased because it depends how the algorithms are written. So when we saw Elon Musk saying that Grok had to become less woke, it took 12 hours for it to be spewing racist nonsense and for it to have been renamed itself as Mecha Hitler. So it is more than just the data. The data is an important point, because when we get answers, it's based on an individualistic Western idea of humanity, which is why it's also so lovely, because it just listens to you and it tells you what you want to hear. People say they use it as a therapist, but a therapist should challenge you, whereas all AI goes, that's terrible. And I'm thinking of leaving my husband. Yes, you should. He's awful. Whereas, so it doesn't have a communal understanding that actually my well-being rests on the well-being of those around me. You will never get a large language to tell you to put yourself second to the interests of others or to the interests of the planet. That is not built into its algorithm. You also said it lies. Now, that's an important point, because I always tell my students, generative AI does not lie. It also does not tell the truth. It simply generates patterns of text. When it gives you a false reference, it is doing what it does when it gives you the correct reference. It is generating patterns of text. It's not a glitch in the system that leads to a hallucination. I don't like the word hallucination, because a hallucination is a glitch. When generative AI produces text, 99% of the time it's going to be great text, and it's going to look exactly like what your understanding of the world is. When the 1% of the time it generates something that you think is a lie or isn't truthful, it is following exactly the same algorithm that allowed it to produce the truthful stuff. And that's an important distinction. The issue of guardrails and the law, I think, is a very, very important one. We've seen Italy put really good laws in place. We've seen Australia putting good laws in place. We've seen the EU putting in place somewhat toothless laws. We've got really good people at Rhodes looking at low-tech AI. I don't know if that's the right word. But you being able to develop AI for us, by us, in ways that are not necessarily going to either destroy the planet or that do not need the billions that the likes of Musk et al. Have. And ending on that note, if you use ChatGPT, please don't. Please use Claude or Copilot or any of the others. We know that ChatGPT and Palantir are now funding us, are being used by us in the US, are being used in the bombing of Iran. They say it was an accident that school was bombed. Then they say it was an AI error. Now they're saying something else. I don't know where the truth is, but please ditch chat and use one of the others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. To offer some closing remarks, I'd like to invite the director of the Center for Postgraduate Studies, Professor Saibet Muterego, and just be mindful, Prof, that there are comments on the screen talking about the fact that folks are keen to get to their food.
Good evening, colleagues. What is happening here reminds me of a story of Rip Van Winkle. I think those who are doing literature might know about Rip Van Winkle, who slept for 20 years during a revolution when America was still a colony. When he slept, the pictures that were on the walls were those of King George III. But when he slept for 20 years, by the time he woke up, there was a man that he didn't know, and this was George Washington. So he slept through a revolution. What is happening now with the AI, with the pace at which things are changing and AI is going, if you blink, you might wake up one day to see a world that you'll never be able to understand. With that said, on behalf of the organizing team and the Office of the Vice Chancellor, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you in this, we've participated in this session to ensure that we know what generative AI can do and its challenges. First of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation to our distinguished panelists who have shared their insights on the complex intersection of generative AI. Thank you so much. And I know it took quite a long time for you to prepare for this. We really want to thank you. But a special word of gratitude goes to our guest panelist, Professor Willie Chinyamrindi from the University of Fort Hare, for joining us and bringing valuable perspectives from his scholarly work and experience. We'd like to thank you, Prof. Before that, we go, I also would like to thank our honored local panelists who have dedicated their time, and some of them who participated in organizing this event. We want to thank Professor McKenna, Dr. Dominic Santos, and Mr. Sibusiso for engaging reflections based on your work and experience. I'd like to thank you, colleagues. Our deepest appreciation goes to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sizwe Mabizela, whose visionary leadership continues to create spaces for critical dialogue on emerging issues that shape scholarly life in this university and the higher education sector as a whole. The Vice Chancellor's commitment fostering conversations on artificial intelligence and its implications for higher education is both timely and inspiring. We would like also to acknowledge the important work that went on behind the scene. We've got a team that has been working since last year to ensure that this event is a success. In particular, I would like to thank Ms. Shiloh Marsh, who is not here, to enjoy what we are doing and learn. Is still working hard to ensure that the event ends well. And her team, Sipo, Esetu, and Zano, who are still outside to ensure that we get what we need as we participate in this event. Finally, thank you to all staff, students, guests who joined us this evening and contributed to the discussion through your thoughtful questions and engagement, including the proposal of making new laws and the ways we are asked ChatGPT. It was quite reflective, and the issue of engaging AI critically, not in the way that we use GPS. Your presence reflects the importance of collective reflection as we navigate the opportunities and ethical challenges presented by generative AI. As I end, I would like to bring this to attention that outside we have refreshments. Don't leave this place before those refreshments are finished. Thank you so much.